Seriously, I want to know. The BBC is funded by the British public. The people who work for it are called journalists. They are in possession of a photograph of one of the sons of Queen Elizabeth, Prince Andrew, still the Duke of York, still on the public payroll, which is so shocking that it could bring down the monarchy, and the BBC will not publish it. Why? Because Prince Andrew won't let them. Who's Prince Andrew to determine the editorial judgments of the BBC? I give them notice now. I intend to campaign to see that photograph. It can be suitably pixelated if it is as dirty as it sounds, or it can be in other ways. Any other persons involved, if there are any, and they are persons, then they can be pixelated or disguised. But I want to know what a member of the Royal House has been doing in front of a camera that is a camera owned by the British Broadcasting Corporation. It's a side issue, but it's one that's just come to my attention. It was published in the Mail on Sunday today. The photographer himself says that it is in an earth-shaking photograph. Well, I think we ought to see it, don't you think? Certainly 19 years ago today, an earth-shaking event was uncovered to the British public. Dr. David Kelly, the eminent weapons scientist, disarmament expert, a man that was destined very shortly for a knighthood, a man that was a pillar of the British deep state, was found dead on Harrowdown Hill, not far from his home, though oddly it took quite a few hours to find him, so close to the door that he supposedly left for his final walk. I'm picking my words carefully because those of you who've already seen my film, directed by the terrific Irish director Sean Murray, a man you'll be hearing a lot about over the course of his career. If you've seen our film, Killing Kelly, you already know that we don't believe that David Kelly committed suicide. We don't know if he was murdered, but we do know that his suicide was faked, and I'm actually of the view that that is worse than if he was murdered. If he was murdered, it might have been in a rage by someone. Might have been an unlucky punch. Might have been a rabbit punch, a sucker punch. Might have been entirely unpremeditated. But if he wasn't murdered, then his suicide was faked. And if it was faked, that means there was a conspiracy within the British state, presumably, or some other state actor of another country, which led to one of the most ham-fisted attempts at faking a suicide in all history. If you watch our film, you'll already know that he simply could not have committed suicide. He simply could not have died on Harrowdown Hill. Apart from 100 other reasons, there wasn't any blood at the scene. And if he'd bled out, he would have lost 3/4 of his circulation. He would have lost about 6 litres of blood. He would have been lying in a pool of blood. But the only blood that was there was a 50-pence piece size blood stain on his jeans and 1 or 2 droplets on the nettles in which he had settled down for a comfortable death. There were no fingerprints on the knife, no fingerprints on the water bottle, no fingerprints on the sheaf of tablets, which he might not even, according to the medical information that we reveal, even have taken a single one. But if he did, he only took a single one. But how could there be no fingerprints on the metallic sheaf from which that tablet supposedly came? How could there be no fingerprints on the knife with which he cut his ulterior artery and became the only man ever to die from a cut to that artery, except if they were in a bath of hot water with a tourniquet around their arm. How could there be no fingerprints on anything? Well, the answer to that is obvious. The fingerprints were wiped. And who wiped them? And why? And whilst he, with his bad arm, could not have cut his ulterior artery, someone standing to the side of him very easily could have. So if that's what happened, even post-mortem, we need to know who was that person and why this eminent British scientist was done to death, or after whose natural death, perhaps under interrogation, perhaps in a security service safe house, perhaps in, say, Southend. Why, if he died naturally, it was thought necessary and proper to fake a suicide? Well, the film doesn't provide the villain of the piece, but it points in a direction that is not difficult to follow. Talking of murder most foul, Joe Biden, who campaigned in poetry for the presidency of the United States, who announced that Saudi Arabia would henceforth, if he were president, be treated as a pariah. His word, not mine, a pariah. How he was going to stop US support for the murderous Saudi war against the people of Yemen, the poorest people in the entire Middle East and one of the poorest people on the earth. He was going to deal with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman as a pariah, until yesterday when he visited him in his royal palace. Why Joe Biden did that is very difficult to discern. It was presumably to force the Saudis to pony up more oil production, to bring down the price of petrol and diesel at the pumps in America and in Europe, where in Britain at least it has now reached £10 per gallon. £10 per gallon. But if that was the purpose, it failed, because Mohammed bin Salman, got to say this for him, he's got balls, he made it clear to Joe Biden that they would not be increasing their oil production. He told them, we're a member of OPEC. It's a cartel. Our cartel allows the market to dictate the price. We don't pump extra oil to bring down the price, not for you or for anybody else. So if that was the goal, it has comprehensively failed. If it was to reset relations with the Saudi Desert Kingdom, which were upset by the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, an American resident with a green card, living and working in Washington as a columnist for the biggest and most important of all American newspapers, who was cruelly murdered on the orders of the aforementioned Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. If it was an attempt to get over that issue, well, that has comprehensively failed also, because not 24 hours after the famous meeting between Joe Biden and MBS, both of them are calling each other liars, because Biden, under domestic pressure, claimed that he had raised the issue of Khashoggi with MBS and demanded explanations, demanded recompense. But MBS has denied that any such thing was ever raised. Although MBS says that he said to Joe Biden, well, you know, America's made quite a few mistakes in the human rights field itself, citing the example of Abu Ghraib, the American concentration camp in Iraq near Baghdad, in which thousands of Iraqis were tortured and sexually humiliated, videotaped by their torturers for their edification in the barracks afterwards, reduced to being leashed, being piled naked on top of each other, forced to perform indecent acts upon each other, having leashes put around their necks. That's what you did, President Biden. You were a shill for the Iraq war. George Bush might have been the president, but you were his chief shill in the Senate of the United States. So don't you come here talking about the human rights of one man. Well, if MBS did say that, then he's beginning to grow on me. I've got to tell you that. If he did have the balls to say he wasn't producing any more oil, if he did have the balls to bring up America's human rights record, if it's true that Saudi Arabia is now a candidate member of the BRICS organization, the kind of alternative G7, but much bigger and much wealthier than the actual G7, if it's true that MBS is going to trade oil for the Chinese currency RMB, if all of that is true, then we're seeing the birth either of a newly independent Saudi Arabia or the death of the former hegemon, the empire, Joe Biden's United States. And if either of those two options is true, then sing hallelujah across the land, across all lands. Because the fact that even a satrapy like Saudi Arabia can now deny the demands being made in person by the President of the United States, can now throw back in the face of the United States their criticism of human rights blemishes and atrocities on their record. That tells you that the new world, which was struggling to be born, is now beginning to emerge into the sun, which is rising in the east. I personally think that Joe Biden would have been better staying at home to fix house. Don't you? After all, the United States is in a state of such sclerotic decline, in such bad odor everywhere in the world because of its own problems with its own people and its own actions in other people's countries. Joe Biden would have been better staying at home. And if the purpose of the visit was, as was widely trailed, the creation of a new NATO, a Middle East NATO, involving Israel, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, it would appear that that too has failed. Nobody wants to be associated with the United States of America. When are people going to understand that the tectonic plates have shifted? The United States has nothing to offer anyone except negatives. Sure, if you don't play ball, it can kill you. If you don't play ball, it might overthrow you. If you don't play ball, it might sanction and seek to wreck your economy. But it cannot actually do anything for you. They don't build bridges and roads and ports and airports like the Chinese do for countries now all over the world, developing countries now seeing their infrastructure rise in front of their eyes. Built not by the United States, but by China. The United States can only try and knock them down with military hardware, but it has not the wherewithal, let alone the political will, to actually do anything good for anybody. And this is now evident. It is crystallizing in the encounter between Biden and MBS in Saudi Arabia this week, in my view at least. Now let me turn, because our first guest is an expert on the Persian Gulf area and on the Middle East in general, and I'll be talking to him in more depth about these matters. Let me turn to the donkey derby that is underway and now in its later stages, down to the last 5 candidates as to who will be Britain's Prime Minister in September. You may think it's a poor kind of democracy when less than 200,000 people, most of them over the age of 70, most of them men, overwhelmingly white, elderly men, will pick the next Prime Minister of Britain with no scintilla of hope that the people will get to have their say in a general election. But park that uncomfortable issue of basic democracy aside. We now have 5 candidates left. I'm in no doubt of which is the worst. Liz Truss is a clear and present danger to the world and must be defeated. She is the one that goes around dressed in a dead woman's clothes. As I joked on Wednesday on the Galloway show, it's kind of like Norman Bates's mother sitting on that rocking chair in the motel in Psycho. You look up, you see Norman Bates's mother, but in fact, she's dead. You look at Liz Truss, you're looking at Margaret Thatcher. Except Margaret Thatcher is dead and Liz Truss, I knew Margaret Thatcher, you ain't no Margaret Thatcher. You're not fit to carry her handbag. You can dress up in her clothes all you like, but you'll never be Margaret Thatcher. And the good news is, it doesn't look like she's ever going to be the Prime Minister either. She has crashed and burned. She's trussed up like a turkey. She's at the bottom of the poll of the 5 candidates left in every opinion poll taken. It's very clear who the establishment want to win, although I'm not sure why. Maybe because they've got a safe pair of hands in Plan B, Sir Keir Starmer, to fall back on if necessary. But the establishment, the Beltway, inside the bubble, they want Dishy Rishi Sunak, 5 foot tall, but worth £3 billion. A man of no substance, but plenty of money. A man who knows the value of nothing but the price of everything. He is the front runner amongst the members of Parliament who have the first say. But there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that whomsoever is in the ballot that goes out to the members, when the final 2 have been arrived at, will defeat Rishi Sunak. For lots of reasons, not all of them by any means honourable, but some of them semi-honourable. It's quite clear and evident that Rishi Sunak and Dominic Cummings brought down Boris Johnson as a matter of premeditated conspiracy. A lot of Conservative members don't like that. They don't like such conspiracies, and some of them, a lot of them, quite like Boris Johnson. So they see him as a snake, as a backstabbing snake. And they wouldn't be wrong. He could crawl under a snake wearing a top hat. But the establishment want him, so he will be in the final ballot. The only question is, who will he be up against? I still believe that the woman I backed in betting terms, not in any other terms, at 40-1, many months ago, when hardly anyone knew her name, Penny Mordaunt, I believe that she will be in the final ballot, and it follows, I believe that she will be elected as Britain's new Prime Minister. But they ain't half out to get her. She's not half finding out that the heat in the kitchen can be very intense indeed. And that her colleagues are all snakes, really. They're trying to smear her on her personal life, on her Royal Naval Service life, trying to smear her over woke issues, transgender rights, and all the rest. She's under attack from both left and right. The question is, in the televised debates tonight, will she be steady enough under fire to come through it? If she doesn't, then if you'll forgive this pun, the dark horse is Kemi Badenoch. Kemi Badenoch is a young Nigerian woman of just 42 years. None of you, virtually none of you, had ever heard of her before. But she has emerged in Truss's place as the darling of the Tory right, of the Brexit movement. And it could just be that the Prime Minister has chosen from a short list of two, one of them an African Indian and the other a Nigerian African, in the Conservative Party in Britain. Wouldn't that be a turn up for the books?